Hello students, and welcome back to the Lore of the Iron Kingdoms with me, Professor Caster. And if you're new to this, here we discuss all the lore of the game Warmachine, brought to us by Privateerpress. And if you're new to class, welcome. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion over the Warjacks of the Protectorate of Menoth, and we're going to be getting into their heavy Warjacks, because why not take Warjacks that are already 10 tons, make them bigger and even more dangerous? And of course, I imagine we are going to be seeing a lot of fire-belching Warjacks as well in this larger category. But before we begin, if you could, please like, subscribe, comment, share this with your friends and fellow gamers alike. It does help the channel grow and keep the Steam train rolling. Also, a thank you to Privateerpress for letting us read your fantastic lore. And a question to start munching on now before we begin that you can comment down below, because that always helps as well. What is the largest warjack, warbeast, or other that you've ever had to face up against on the field of battle? I've had to go up against quite a few very large creatures, but I would say that mine personally is the Wold Wrath of the Circle Oberos. Not sure how they got that guy into our particular battle, but he did some devastating things to my men and my warjacks alike, so always be wary. But comment down below, let me hear your stories, because they're always very nice. And without further ado, let's begin. Castigator. The Castigator is a product of the expanding wartime industry demanded of the Great Crusade. The impressive Warjack is based on the same chassis as the Reckoner, which is renowned as the first Warjack entirely of Solmanite design. Few outside of the vassals of Menoth know the Castigator was actually conceived before the Reckoner, but problems with the weapon system delayed its unveiling. The displeasure of Viscos Arkrazek at his failure was so great that he had every mechanic on the project racked within the breath of death before being restored and put back to work with renewed and terrified determination. Miraculously, the problems were resolved almost immediately. The Castigator's fist blazed continuously in combat, the intense heat sending rippling waves of distortion through the air as the Warjack charges into the enemy. Each fist is equipped with a sophisticated delivery system of Menoths Fury, which is compressed and piped in direct contact with the ignition temperatures of the Warjack's powerful furnace. If beset by multiple foes, the Castigator ignites the air around it in powerful explosions of incinerating heat that instantly melts iron and cremates living flesh. One major advantage of the Castigator is the ease to which it is refueled. Its fists need only a fresh supply of Menoths Fury to be ready again for battle. Freed from reliance on supports from Emmer, the Castigator has been dispatched to the front lines of the Protectorate's crusade to bring justice of the Inferno to all who have forsaken the Creator of man. And this guy is uber dangerous, because being able to explode in fiery fury and his fists are literally on fire, which actually sounds very much like most of Menoth's jacks at this point, just make him even more dangerous in the long run. And he's a heavy, so he's also hard to take out of the battlefield and put out of commission easily without, consolidated effort. But that being said, let's go over his Mark III to Mark IV changes after we go over his other stats. So his initial service date was 606 AR, as discussed, because it came after the Reckoner, as mentioned in the reading. His height is 12 feet, so he's very tall. His weight is 8.4 tons, so he's actually kind of light in comparison to some other Warjacks. His fuel load is 798 pounds. His general use is 5.5 hours, and his combat use is 60 minutes. Armaments include twin flame fists. And his cortex was manufactured by the vassals of Menoth. So I'm curious if his weight is lighter only because he carries so much fuel inside of him. Maybe that's what it is. I'm not entirely sure. Or maybe I just compare too many Warjacks to Khadoran Warjacks who weigh a lot. That could also be it as well. But let's move on to the Mark III to Mark IV changes. And let's start with his stat line, because that's always the most enjoyable. He is a speed 5. He is a mat of 7 now, so he's actually gone up since Mark III, so he's a little bit better in melee. He is a defense of 10 and arm 19, so he is a hard hitter. He has slam, trample, and headbutt, because he is a large warjack. He also has immunity to fire damage, He is also a gladiator, so he gets an additional +2 to his damage rolls for special power attacks, like, well, as before mentioned. And it actually adds up, so whenever he's doing, say, a trample attack through a bunch of, smaller bases than him, each of those trample attacks, instead of just doing 14, they now do 16, making him even more detrimental in his power attacks. But his abilities include Ashen Veil, which this model gains concealment, and then living enemy models without resistance to fire suffer a -2 to attack rolls while within 2 inches of this model. So if they are living models trying to attack him, his defense is always 12, whether it's shooting at them or if a living model's within 2 of him, they suffer from that as well, which makes him a little bit more dodgy for heavy jacks. That's always very useful. His second move that they added to him as a special attack rather than a original weapon attack like it was before is Combustion special attack. This attack does not need a target. Other models within 2 of this model suffer a power 12 fire damage rolls and fire continuous effect. Combustion damage is simultaneous. This model can make additional melee attacks after making this special attack, and the special attack does take up both his initial attacks, so you will have to pay for each of those attacks afterwards with focus. And what's nice about this one is it is auto 12 damage, so if your model is, or if its target is very particularly dodgy, this automatically hits and automatically catches them on fire. So if you're going up against like an elf who has like a defense of like 14 to 16, that would make it very difficult to hit. You can catch him on fire and do 12 damage, and that usually kills off most elves or low armored targets anyway. But let's go over to his weapons, his melee weapons, his Flame Fist, if you will. Well, actually, that's what they're called, so Flame Fist. He has a Mat 7, range 1, and POW 16. POW 16 is a pretty decent punching for any kind of warjack, so you always want to keep that up. Much better than a light warjack. And both of these are open fist, so you have all the open fist rules on that one as well, including throwing things. So very useful. And he has continuous fire effect on these weapons as well. Now, this weapon is not a fire damage weapon, it just causes fire continuous effect. So if you're going against anybody who has immunity to fire, the only thing they're not going to be able to do is reduce the amount of damage that you're doing punching them, because they are still being hit with steel fists. So it's not like they're being shot with like a flamethrower or something like that. So they will be taking all the normal damage. The only thing they avoid is being lit on fire, because when you have immunity to fire, you can't be hit with the fire continuous effect. So thus making him still a brutal guy even up against guys that have resistance to fire. But if they don't, makes him even better than that. All in all, Castigator, a real good guy about getting a lot of fire out. I believe moving his combustion back over to a special attack rather than a 2-punch. If he can hit both punches, he explodes basically. So I believe it is better as a special attack than it was as a chain attack that it was in Mark III. So that is that. But yeah, very useful for anybody who wants to have an additional fire starter in their army. And with the Protectorate of Menoth, that is everybody. So get him while he lasts. But let's move on. Crusader. In the peace terms after the Civil War, Signar decreed the Protectorate could not keep a standing army. The Viscos Ozil acquiesced, but secretly commanded engineers to build warjacks using cortex smuggled down the Black River from the Kodor and Signarin parts salvaged from fields of battle. Those early jacks were designed with open hands to pass as labor jacks in casual inspection. Meanwhile, artificers worked to forge weapons for them to wield as Menoths willed. The greatest of the new Protectorate designs was the Crusader, a massive warjack boasting heavy armor and capable of crushing attacks. The chassis originated during the reign of Hierarch Luctine, who devoted himself to subjugating outlying Idrian tribes. Even when the Idrians converted after the earthquake in 504 AR, many tribes resisted and continued to harass the young nation. The Crusader was unleashed to provide an unstoppable force in the battles to come. It also proved the strength against Signar when frictions between the two nations prompted clashes along the Black River. Already possessed of an immensely durable armored frame and powerful laborjack arms, after the development of Menoths Fury, the Crusader was enhanced by the Inferno Mace, This weapon, inspired by the blazing maces of the Reclaimers, can easily rend most armors into flaming scraps. When the call to arms sounded, Crusaders assembled at the front lines, ready to hammer and burn the foes of Menoth to dust and ash. And yes, that is a very brutal fire-starting mace. And even if you're not caught on fire with it, if you're hit with it, you're probably going to be gone anyway. Even Warjacks being hit with that mace is probably not going to be doing very well after the attack has subsided. So, yeah. But very basic, and it does fall along the way that they did start most of the early jacks, of having just open hands. So they look like a laborjack, but in turn they're really not a laborjack once you hand them an actual weapon. But let's read his little stat line here. Let's see what he looks like. He is 12 feet tall. His initial service date was 513 AR. He is 8 tons. His fuel load is 759 pounds. His general use is 6 hours. His combat use is 60 minutes. And his armaments include an Inferno mace. His cortex was manufactured by the vassals of Menoth, and he is currently in manufacturing now that they are making all of their cortexes themselves, because they now have the manufactoriums, or whatever you call those. So, but let's read his Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes and see if he's gotten any more dangerous, any less dangerous, or the same. I'm going to say probably the same. And as always, we will start with his stat line. He has a speed 4, so he's a heavy boy. His mat is still a 6. His defense is still a 10. His armor is still a 19. He does have the ability to trample, slam, and headbutt. And he is a very basic warjack with an open fist that can do, it is a mat 6, range 1, POW 15. So it's actually a little bit stronger than some other guys' open fists. So I imagine because he is from a laborjack, those guys need to be pretty dang strong. And his Inferno mace is where the fun part starts. It is a mat 6, range 1, POW 18. So he's swinging about as hard as a Kodor Jack swinging his axe. And it does critical fire. So he's basically the exact same Warjack that he was in Mark 3 to Mark 4. So nothing changed at all outside of him having now 360 degree vision, as every other model has 360 degree vision. So this guy is just that little bit better. But if you need a warjack who is semi-cheap and able to put down some destructive force with that mace, he is going to be a guy that you want to have in your field of battle. But let's move on. Guardian. Covered in holy script and able to channel the divine powers of Menoth's clergy, the Guardian is a walking icon of the Creator's might. Originally constructed to help defend Menoth's most sacred sites, the Guardian has since become one of the most versatile weapons in the Protectorate's arsenal. At the forefront of crusading forces, the Guardian and its battle banners rise over the Menoth army, inspiring the faithful to righteous fury. Although only a small number of Guardians were initially constructed, the utility of the Divinity Arc node augmenting the resilience of the heavy warjack could not be ignored, and the Protectorate warcaster soon requested an increase in production. Even so, the tremendous cost of the Arc nodes is prohibitive to produce them in great numbers. Inspired by the traditional weapons carried by the Guardians of Menoth's holy sites, the Jack's primary weapon is a large pike superheated to penetrate even the heaviest armor. With the smoldering implement of destruction in hand, the Guardian wades through battles, incinerating any who stand in its way. Each Guardian is a finely crafted instrument of war, painstakingly engraved with the ornate liturgy, verses, and illuminations. These warjacks are so infused with holiness that some war priests use them as battle altars when far from their home temples. And yes, these guys are very holy looking. One of the many, I imagine, Menoth warjacks that are that look like walking churches, basically. So, and having a spear that's superheated, so it can literally melt through steel when it's stabbing somebody, is just, you know, terrifying. Also, the fact that it has an arc node too makes it even more useful for any warcaster of the Protectorate of Menoth. But let's read over its stat line. Its height is 12 feet, initial service date 588 AR. Its weight is 8.4 tons. Its fuel load is 827 pounds. General use 6 hours. Combat use 60 minutes. And its armaments include a flame pike, a Mark II Divinity Arc node. and its cortex was manufactured by the vassals of Menoth, and it is currently, well, at least a couple years ago, was still in production by the Menoth. I'm not sure how far low they got after the Infernals campaign, but let's go over the Mark III to Mark IV changes and see if anything happened. Maybe it got a little more streamlined, or maybe the whole thing's been scrapped and redone. I'm pretty sure it's probably going to be pretty close to the same, so let's check it out. Alrighty, and we will start with their stat line as always. He still is a speed 4 because he is a big boy. His mat is still a 7, defense still a 10, arm still a 19. He can still trample, slam, and headbutt as per usual for a large Warjacks. And his special abilities is he has set defense. He had set defense originally. So models suffer a -2 on charge and slam power attack rolls against this model, so it increases his defense up to a 12 basically against whatever model's charging into him. And he also has an arc node, so pretty simple there. His weapons have his open fist, a mat 7, range 1, and POW 14. So pretty decent for an open fist. His pike is the fun part. So his pike is a mat 7, range 2, so he's got some range on him, and a POW 18. And his special abilities on this include critical pitch. On a critical hit against a model with equal to or smaller base size than this, can be thrown d6 directly away from this model. And the power of the collateral damage is equal to the power of this weapon, so it is a collateral 18 damage. So if you slam him into, if you end up fishing for crits and you get a crit with this and you slam him into, say, his own warcaster, it does a POW 18 to his warcaster automatically and knocks everybody over. Very, very useful on that. And then his second one is Powerful Charge, so he gains an additional +2 to his charge attack rolls, making him even more accurate when he's slamming into whatever model he's going for, basically getting his mat up to a 9 when charging in. It is the exact same Warjack from Mark III to Mark IV, so really nothing has changed outside of him just being updated and them removing the strength buff off the stat line. So there you go. Very useful with the reach weapons, and an arc node for anybody who has warcasters is always a very useful proposition. Probably don't want to waste him on a Jack Marshal because that arc node is, well, it's pretty costly for a Warjack. If you want to put anybody on Jack Marshal, it'll probably be the Crusader, just because he doesn't need a whole lot of stuff to be efficient and he's not super expensive. So, and he does have an arc node because arc nodes are a lot more useful to warcasters, as we are all well aware. But let's move on. Indictor, the sanctification process whereby warjacks are made clean and pure to join the Great Crusade, has become an essential aspect of their fabrication. Yet the Indicator stands apart from the rest, crafted as a bastion of spiritual power against which the foes of the Protectorates must tremble. It is the bane of spellcasters wherever the leaders of the Great Crusade confront them. The Indicator was built on the venerable Crusader chassis. A portion of those most loyal to machines was set aside to be transformed into something still greater by the Soul Midnight Artificers. Though it starts with an ancient frame, each Indictor becomes a marvel of modern engineering as old elements are painstakingly replaced and purified. Imbued with disruptive mechanica and covered in passages from the canon of the true law, the Indictor has a discordant presence that disperses blasphemous magics set against the faithful. In addition to its mystical defenses, each Indictor is equipped with a massive shield and a blessed blade. The Banisher's holy runes empower the weapon to penetrate arcane defenses, erected to shield the enemies of the true faith from the Creator's wrath. Some leaders, such as Viscos Arch Razak, consider the mighty Indictor proof that they have moved beyond merely cleansing these fighting machines. Such leaders see Warjacks as integral and sacrosanct elements of the Protectorate's Holy Crusade, an inspiration to the faithful as well as a terror to their enemies. And yes, this guy is very much a Warjack that turns off magic while within a certain perimeter of him. And any guy that is able to shut down magic of the enemies is always a very useful. And you know how the Protectorates feel about spellcasters outside of their holy order, and witch hunts are very much a thing that does happen in the Protectorate of Menoth. So, but Let's go over his little stat line here. He is 12 feet 1 inch tall. His initial service date started in 607 AR. He is 8 tons, 8.4 tons to be precise. His fuel load is 835 pounds. His general use is 6 hours. His combat use is 60 minutes. And his armaments include his shield and his banisher. And his cortex was manufactured by the vassals of Menoth. So let's read over his Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes and see how much more terrifying he has gotten, because this guy is a problematic warjack to go up against any of your enemies who especially like using magic to slow you down or remove any of the most holy zealots of the Protectorate army. And as always, let's start with this stat line. He is a speed 4 because he is a big boy. He has a mat of 7. He has a defense of 10. And his armor is 19 to 21, depending on if he still has his shield active or not. So basically brand new, his armor is 19 as always. And of course he has his slam, trample, and headbutt attacks because he's a large warjack as well. And then let's go over his abilities. So he has a couple abilities here. He has Consecration. So while within 6 inches of this model, enemy models cannot cast spells, channel spells, or upkeep spells. Ooh, so if you get him up near like an enemy warcaster who has a bunch of upkeep spells, they shut off. That is a staggering effect when that happens, I imagine. And he has Sacred Ward, so he cannot be targeted by enemy spells. So he is immune to being hit with spells, and he turns off spells if he's within 6 inches of them, making him even more a danger to the enemies of the one true faith. And his weapons, because he has weapons because he's not just a guy who turns off spells. He has his Banisher, which is a Mat 7 range 1 magical weapon with Blessed, so it also turns off any kind of armor buffs, armor and defense buffs presented by spells. And then he has his shield, which is a Mat 7 range 1 PAL 13. That gives him his +2 armor when that thing is still active. So as far as that goes, he is a very, very useful jack when it comes to going up against guys that like to pump out a lot of spells. He's good at shutting them down. And if there's any ways that you can get him up to the enemy spellcasters as quickly as possible, you probably want to toss those spells on him, since he can be affected by friendly spells, just not by enemy spells, which is way better than it used to be. Because I believe Sacred Ward back in like Mark 1 or 2 used to be can't be affected by any spells, but I think we have some adjustments now. So, but yeah, he is a very specialized jack, but he still does a good amount of damage with his Banisher anyway. So he is still a hard-hitting jack that just has a lot more specialties than some others. But that will conclude this branch of heavy warjacks, and then next week we'll complete the rest of the heavy warjacks that are not character warjacks. And yeah, but before we end, we're going to rehash out the question: what is the largest warjack / war beast that you've ever had to go up against in battle? Because we would love to hear those stories and love to hear the if you pulled out a win or if you had to retreat the field. Let us know. It's always very fantastic to hear your guys' stories of all of your battles. Also, thank you guys so much. If you could, please like, subscribe, comment, let your friends and fellow gamers know about this YouTube channel, as always. And please feel free to share any of these videos with your friends on your own media accounts. It also helps this channel grow and helps us spread out so everybody can see this stuff as well. Also, another thank you to Privateerpress for letting us read your fantastic lore. And as always, class dismissed.